Hello, my name is Matt Hetler. I am presenting Tinder Box, the Iroquois Theater Disaster 1903 by Anthony P. Hatch. Why I decided to read Tinder Box is because I am a firefighter and I believe that looking into the past to see what tragedies happen that have set the stage for how we do our business is very beneficial. Um, it helps us learn why certain building codes and life safety codes have changed, and can also benefit firefighters in how to uh, extinguish fires based on fire behavior. So the book was written nearly 100 years after the disaster. It took over 4 decades for Mr. Hatch to write, and this was because he was collecting a lot of research. He got most of his information from newspaper articles, magazines, books, and from back then, from 1903. And he was also able to interview the current fire commissioner in the 1960s named William Corrigan. William Corrigan was one of the responding firefighters to the actual Iroquois Theater on that fateful night of December 30th. The reporter he also got to interview Charles Collins, was a new reporter with one of the local newspapers that went there during the opening of the Iroquois fire, and then was also dispatched back there when the tragedy was happening. Mr. Hatch had a difficult time locating a lot of printed material because the transition into the microfiche um, and translation into the new technology, a lot of stuff was lost. Also, pictures were hard to come by because of at the turn of the century, the new way to take pictures was with magnesium bulbs, and they needed people to stand very still to be able to capture a picture. And as you can imagine, when a fire is raging out of a building and everybody's running and screaming for their life, not too many people are going to stand still for a picture. So the newspapers dispatched sketch artists to um, draw scenes that were going on. Mr. Hatch takes the reader through the historical time of the turn of the century, and that what we saw at the turn of the century was, the industrial boom was going on, the automobile was just being introduced, cities were getting bigger, there were this economic driven society going on. Union strikes, there's movement and labor and union strikes were going on at the time of the construction, which ended up delaying the opening of the Iroquois fire in Chicago. They also had transportation issues when the theater was open, which had an economic impact on it because the public transit official or employees were on strike, and so he kind of paints the picture of what it was like to live and survive at the turn of the century. So the Iroquois Theater was opened on November 23rd, 1903, after much delay with halts in construction due to strikes. The show that they were going to put on that was going to christen the theater was Mr. Bluebeard. It came from over in England and consisted of very elegant drapery and a lot of colors and lights, and it was big. It was a big show production. The theater was located in the downtown area of Chicago, and by many people in that industry is considered the new standard for playhouses. It incorporated a lot of modern technology dealing with light fixtures, and the interior design of it is very elegant, and the engineers and architects deemed it absolute fireproof. The investors of the theater sunk about $1.1 million into this theater and had claimed that no expense was too great to make this the best theater in the country at the time. The fire occurred on December 30th, 1903, during a matinee showing of Mr. Bluebeard. It was believed to be caused by a faulty light fixture that caught some of the scenery drapery on fire, and it eventually began to rage out of control, and the fire spread to the auditorium. Over 600 people died. The actual number of people that had perished in this fire is really unknown. It ranges from 560 to 605, and that was because as victims were being pulled out, family members would grab them and just take them home. Or if somebody was missing, they knew that they were at the Iroquois fire and they couldn't find them. They would say that they figured they were dead. So a lot of things contributed to the actual fire. One of them being the fire load. So what the interior of the theater was furnished with was a lot of wood that was lacquered, and when a fire is burning, everybody knows that wood contributes to a fire. So that helped the fire spread. As I mentioned before, was the scenery drapery, and contributed to the fire. What really ended up causing the most deaths was asphyxiation and being trampled to death. Everybody was, once they saw the fire, they panicked and they were trying to get out and couldn't, and they crushed people, and the whole auditorium was charged with smoke, so they weren't getting enough oxygen, and they would pass out and eventually die. And I will try to paint the picture for you once we get into the next slide on why these individuals. So, some of the shortcomings that led to this tragedy was that the owners of the theater cut many corners, and some of the big ones were the fire escapes. The fire escapes from the second floor down, the stairs that are there outside of the building weren't complete. Also, they never completed the vent system above the stage that was there in case a fire occurred. They could open them and it would help expel hot gases and the smoke to protect the patrons the the actors. And also, what the vent system would do is provide oxygen. And I know what I'm getting ready to say is going to sound counterproductive, but in the fire service, um, we want to expel the hot gases and smoke because it increases visibility and makes the environment attainable, but also it keeps the fire in check in the place that it's at. So you open up this vent, oxygen will come in, and fire travels to the path of least resistance. So as long as it's getting fed oxygen, it's relatively going to stay there. The building had inadequate fire suppression systems at the time. The turn of the century, we saw that standpipes and sprinklers were being put into buildings. Standpipes, think of them as a water main that runs through a building, and it has connections to it that firefighters can hook a hose up to and use the water from the municipal supply to put out the fire. Everybody knows what sprinklers are. Once they're activated, the pennant um, deflects water over an area, keeps the fire in check, and most of the time puts it out. The only fire suppression that they had there was Keflex, and all that was a fire retardant. It was a powder that you had to throw by hand, which I'm sure you can imagine is highly ineffective when there's panic going on. So, one of the big contributing factors of why patrons could not get out of the theater when the fire was going on is that the doors swung inward. So, as you can imagine, is there's mass panic. People are trying to get out, and you have to pull the doors towards you. So everybody's piling up against you, and there's this back pressure, and the door won't open. Also, many of the doors were locked from the theater to the foyer, and as you can see in the picture below, they had gates that locked across the stairs. And why this was going on is the management did not want people that paid for the cheaper seats to make their way down to the seats that were more expensive to get a better view. Um, Also, the overall design, the architect wanted everybody to feel like they were important, so there was a main stairwell that went up to the theater and then broke off to go upstairs. So his thought is hey, everybody, no matter where your ticket's at, you're going up the same stairwell, so you couldn't tell who was the who of Chicago and the person that spent their week paycheck for a ticket to go see. Everybody seemed important. Well, when people were able to get out and they're trying to go down these stairs to go out the front door, there was a big traffic jam, and again, um, nobody was able to move, and which led to people being trampled or dying of asphyxiation. Secondary exits were blocked or obstructed. So all the other exits, they didn't have any fire exit signs on them. That's number one. Number two, drapery was put over them or some kind of scenery or something, so people didn't really know if it was a door or what it was. It was they were covered up. Also, the main fire exit that led out to the alley was locked, and that was because management didn't want um, individuals sneaking into the theater. There was an overall blatant failure to follow city ordinances, and this really fell on the building inspectors. At the time, the construction boom was going on. They didn't have enough building inspectors to inspect all the buildings, and also there's a big corruption going on. So a lot of times these building inspectors would look the other way to get free tickets or get greased a little bit. Also, the staff, the ushers and everything, were not trained on how to respond to a fire. When the fire started raging on and people were trying to get out, there were ushers on the other side that wouldn't unlock the door because they were told not to unlock them for any reason until the play was over or the act was over. They weren't trained on what to do if a fire, like I said, if a fire occurred. They didn't have a proper evacuation plan or anything like that in place. So, what changes did we see from this disaster? Well, I'm going to go into first the changes that happened in the city of Chicago right after the disaster. Right after the disaster, the mayor of Chicago shut down every playhouse and every public building to make sure that they were up to par with the codes and standards of the city. And that had a far reaching effect, not only uh, domestically in the United States, but also internationally. Because at the time, we're starting to get in the information age. It's not the computers and stuff, but people were through telegraphs were getting hearing about this fire that happened. So once he shut down the theaters, a lot of bigger cities started following pursuit, and even countries over in Europe. Um, Now, what we did moving forward from there and kind of set the stage for where we're at now, it set up that exit doors have to be clearly marked. Um, the standard now is a certain size. It has to glow. It's not it's not operated by any kind of battery or other auxiliary power. It's uh, it's luminescent on its own. Granted, they didn't have that back in 1903, but they just had to clearly mark the fire exit. Also, they couldn't be obstructed. Doors now have to be open outward. Uh, Things are not supposed to be locked. Evacuation plans are put in pamphlets and on the walls so everybody knows where to go. Um, Fire suppression systems are up to date and where they're supposed to be. The other thing is with the Iroquois fire, they didn't. The firefighters couldn't see in there. It was hard. There's no auxiliary lighting, so now buildings had to have auxiliary lighting. And then you just saw an overall increase in stricter building and life safety codes. The response, to the fire from the fire stations were within their response times, but it showed that how depleted the Chicago Fire Department was. The city's booming and growing and getting bigger, but the public safety side hadn't kept up. So you saw that there was more fire personnel hired afterwards, and better equipment came out. As we can see, this tragedy was very unfortunate, but throughout history, I'm sure as everybody else has noticed with these books that we read, um, to move forward and to protect populations, tragedies have to happen, as unfortunate as they are, through the bureaucratic system. You know, the people that make the decisions don't necessarily listen until there's a public outcry. In the book, Mr. Hatch had made many references that city Chicago fire department personnel had sent it up the chain that this theater is a matchstick waiting to happen, and it's going to burn down, and a lot of people are going to die, and nobody really cared to listen because it was when something's going on, it costs money to change stuff, and everybody would the owners would be greatly impacted, the city economically be impacted because it's not bringing in, they can't get the tax roll off of the income and things like that. So anyway, I hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I'm sorry that this was late. I pulled a 48, two 48s the past 5 days. I was trying to get this done, but I will show you my references, and there you go. We'll look forward to your responses, and again, thank you for listening.